didn't think she was
really.
that much.
Yeah.
Oh, we're live on YouTube now.
Oh,
I'm hoping.
we've arrived.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's what
Laurie's.
it said.
Oh, and Stan's here as well. Okay, I think that's
the full set.
That's the full set. Okay. Well, hopefully. So shall I just let everybody in? Are we? Do we need to have any quick discussion with everybody here before we do that, or?
I don't think there's any need. I think we're okay. Anybody else want
to? Actually, I suppose one thing to ask is, this is a sort of cosmetic thing, but in terms of what? In terms of putting the number of people on screen when it records. At the moment, we're going to get a dozen, I think, which should, if I step off, that'll mean all of you will be on. Hey, Laurie.
Hiya.
With when Stan. Is here as well. Is Stan actually entered the building? No, not yet.
Yeah, he was lurking.
He was. I saw him.
Yeah, he was there.
Yeah.
Maybe he had connection trouble. Hi, Laurie.
Hi, Nicole. How are you? Love your background.
Thanks. I have lots. I'm getting a little zoomed out, but I'm very pleased to be here with this group.
I thought that was real.
Yes, this is my office. I had Dumbledore's office, but I saw another colleague do that. So.
All right. Yeah, I've been using all the BBC backdrops. Well, not very often, but occasionally. So I've had the 1960s Doctor Who set and a few things like that.
Hi, Stan.
Hello. Hi, Alan. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Simon.
Hey. Now,
Hi,
is that
Stan.
a real library behind you, or
I have to confess my bedroom's in a bit of a mess at the moment, so this is a cover up. Yeah, as it was at the conference on Tuesday. You probably guessed.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, we've got a few people outside. Oh no, okay. That was what I was trying to say. Do we want to manage the screens for the recording so that when we're doing the 1 minute things, we all switch off apart from the person who's talking, so that they become a full screen?
Yeah,
good idea.
That makes sense.
And then at the end of that, so if we all switch our screen, switch our videos off, apart from when we're actually talking or part of the discussion, and then when everybody has a discussion at the end, we can do it like this, which looks okay. This looks all right. Okay, so I'll let everybody in then. Okay, here we go.
So we should have both video and the mic off until it's our turn?
Yeah, I think that's...
I really feel strong.
I'll let everybody in then. Okay. Oh, here we go, look.
Have both video and the mic off until it's our turn?
Yeah, I think that somebody's watching it on YouTube Live, and it's coming through the yeah, I think somebody's watching it on YouTube Live, and it's coming through the it might even be me. No,
Can we ask the new people coming in to turn off their mics to prevent all the feedback?
Yeah, I've just got to actually can you do that, and I'm just copying and pasting links to make sure everything is in the right place. So, okay. Okay, good. All right. I'll turn that off. And right. Okay. So, okay, sorry, I'm looking at the comments and great. Okay, so I'm going to start. We're already on YouTube Live. I'm going to start the recording that will go on the website now, which is the Zoom recording. So, John, can I ask you to switch your camera off and well, everyone apart from Alan and myself for the moment. Okay, right. Okay, let's start recording. Record on this computer. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody to this session of the third week of the IASPM London Calling 2020 online conference. We're very pleased to be launching one of the new series of Bloomsbury handbooks, or the ongoing series of Bloomsbury handbooks, and we have a whole group of people who I'm not going to try and remember everybody's name, but we're going to start with Alan Moore and Paul Carr, the two editors of the Bloomsbury Handbook of Rock Music Research, if I've got the title right. And we're going to start with Alan and Paul giving a little introduction, and then we're going to be introduced to some of the chapters, and then we're going to have a chat about it. So I'm going to hand over to Alan and get out of the way.
Thank you, Simon. I'm glad this is happening remotely. I've been pigging aniseed balls all afternoon, and they exude a slight odor. So I'm glad none of you can smell the odor. Okay, when Bloomsbury first contacted me sometime in 2015 with a view to putting together a rock music research handbook, my first inclination was to decline. After all, I was on the point of leaving academia, and having been involved with such volumes before, I knew what I'd be letting myself in for. But I swiftly realized I was wondering whether I would be likely to be satisfied with anyone else's perspective on the construction of the field. And of course I wouldn't. I'm not sure any of us would, really. So I found myself accepting and immediately noting what I would not want the book to do and what I would want it to do. And this is the perspective I want to focus on just briefly. I guess multi-authored music handbooks or guides or companions have been around for at least 50 years, and I'm not counting the Oxford Dictionary approach, which is even longer. My abiding memory of the earliest of these that I knew as an undergraduate was that coverage tended to be very variable in terms of holding any particular reader's attention. Some chapters would be spot on in terms of interest, and others would not be read at all. And this was an inevitable consequence of the underlying aim, which was to present a comprehensive view of the topic, mostly in my early use of these things, the work of a particular composer. In recent years, the range of such volumes, as I'm sure we all know, has grown, possibly too much. And that underlying aim has seemed to me to become pretty diluted and sometimes completely dispensed with. Now, while the current day practice of inviting potential contributions to such volumes is laudably open-minded, many contemporary volumes seem to me very uneven in terms of coverage. I'll say no more because I'm not here to criticize anyone else's work, but I felt I did want this handbook to return to the issue of comprehensive coverage and to feel like a single volume rather than a collection of related essays. Now that's a pretty stupid aim, I'm sure some of you are thinking. Comprehensive coverage is almost by definition impossible, even when the field is well demarcated. Here though, as we all know, the label rock is not subject to any sort of general agreement over what it covers. And yet many disciplines address it in one form or another. Now, I'm always a bit suspicious of research which seems intended to demonstrate what insights a particular discipline brings to a particular field, and much prefer work which sets out to answer a particular question or to address a particular topic. Who on earth wrote this? Needs editing. Drawing on a range of disciplines in order to promote avenues of exploration. So I began to structure the contents of this handbook around distinct topics that I thought prominent enough to be of interest to a specific readership, rather than structure it around various disciplines. My own background as a music analyst is, I'm sure, visible in my evaluation of prominent topics, but I have tried to avoid both the musicology-centered and the sociology-centered coverage of music, which still seem to me separately to dominate essay collections, and to achieve some sort of balance between these. And I aimed for this balance to be demonstrated not only in content, but also in authorship, seeking both experienced and early career scholars, both female and male, and both those inside and outside established centers of research excellence. Now, overviews of scholarship on any topic, as we all know, are usually both instructive to research, that's what we enjoy, and tedious to narrate unless one is a gifted writer. And I've done enough of such chapters never to want to touch another. But such work is indispensable to this sort of volume. So in writing their chapter, each contributor was specifically asked, where possible, to bear in mind 3 issues. The first is the various research methodologies which have been and in the future may be employed to address the topic, how they do so and how well. The second is to note any key historical moments in the development of understanding of their particular topic, or what would be significant elements in a literature review. And the third is to note the consequences of this body of work, perhaps to offer a position statement, if that's appropriate, and to speculate on the prospects for profitable future work. And to circumvent problems of definition, authors were asked to use as their definition of rock music whatever usages they found in the discourses surrounding the topic they were writing on. So chapters may include metal as a form of rock, some include various types of pop, some include types of indie music. The term's instability is endemic, and the book necessarily displays that nature. So when in mid-2016, I sent out my first invitations to particular individuals to contribute specific chapters for the volume, I had a very clear sense of my ideal book. The ideal must have lasted all of 2 weeks, I reckon, for on receipt of each plea of an already overburdened writing timetable, I had to find an alternative author who frequently didn't quite fit my ideal profile. And so when you look down the list of contributors to the published volume, you'll discover that I failed to achieve that idealized balance. And I spent many hours juggling potential replacements, particularly when a preferred author pulled out at a late stage of the project. Now, of course, all editors have labored under the same pressures. If you've never put together such a book, I would suggest this is probably the most troublesome part of the activity. Fortunately, there were always other competent people I could turn to. And so the book took on its own life, guided but not exactly controlled by my hand. And just as well, probably. It's a book I'm very pleased to have been able to bring out. I'm even more pleased that once I realized I'd taken on too much, Paul Carr agreed to come on board and take the book through its final stages. So I'll now hand over to Paul to give you a perspective on what this handbook actually contains.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it seems like a long journey. It's been a long time coming. So it's really great to be at this spot where we're actually launching the book. It's going to be out in a couple of months' time. So, like many of the other authors, Alan contacted me about 3.5 years ago now, 4 years ago possibly, asking me to contribute a chapter. And I took on the role of co-editor around about 14 months ago. Like Alan, I displayed initially a little bit of trepidation at taking on the task. There's a lot of chapters and Alan has got big shoes to fill. Plus the deadline was pretty tight. You know, it was really pushing up against the deadline. However, I just felt it was such an important project to get out there. I just sort of delved into it all guns blazing, as it were. So it quickly became a sort of an obsession, I suppose, to get the book finished. So the book has ended up with 33 chapters in total, split broadly into 5 parts. So there's a introductory set of chapters which examines subject matters such as the emergence and the death of rock music history, the emergence of rock scholarship, and also rock definitions. And then the book moves into the main 4 sections, which can be described as follows. So the first section is entitled Practice, Analysis and Recording. And this has got chapters on subject matters such as the rock voice, song analysis, harmonic and melodic theories, rhythmic and metric theories, computational musicology, lyric analysis, engineering and production, and sonic space. The second section quickly follows on, and that one is entitled Rock Theories, which has got chapters on authenticity, genre classification, rock persona, rock hermeneutics, narrativity, and finally representations of autonomy. And then we've got a section entitled Rock Environments, which features chapters on rock pedagogy, recording studios, marketing and commodification, the music press, visual media and live performance. And finally, a section entitled Social and Cultural Issues, which features chapters on politics and policy, gender and sexuality, race, rock and place, non-English speaking rock, and finally fandom, which closes the book off. So you've probably gathered the book is constructed thematically rather than chronologically. So it's possible to access the book at any point, which was part of Alan's original aim. And I would say the 33 chapters outlines the strength and depth in the field. In fact, the bibliography is so substantive that Bloomsbury at one point were asking if we would consider not even including it in the book, but putting it online. But rest assured, it is in there, but it just makes the book very large. So before I finish and move on to the other contributors, I just want to say a huge thanks from both me and Alan to everybody who contributed to the volume. Thanks for responding so expertly, but also so promptly. The deadline was tight, like I said. So I can only say thanks for that. So the book is very much a collective effort, and I really can't thank everybody enough. And I'm really pleased that a number of the contributors are here tonight to both celebrate the launch, but also to say a few words about their respective chapters, and also to engage in the discussion that we have later. So I'll kick off just by saying a few words about my own chapter, and then what I'll do is just introduce some of the other contributors in turn. So my chapter initially reviews and critiques the existing literature that's been written over the last 50 years concerning rock pedagogy, which is what the chapter is about, focusing on the UK and the US in particular. After briefly reviewing rock education's expansion and cultural context, it proceeds to explore a number of issues facing academic students and institutions who teach, study, and facilitate the subject today. Mainly focusing on pre-university education, the chapter outlines how current elitist perspectives of rock have historical precedents, which I don't think we've always learned from. And the chapter discusses how current practices often result not only in government bodies and examination boards using misjudged evaluative criteria when discussing and assessing rock music, but also negative subliminal messages regarding its value. So in the chapter, I outline a couple of case studies which ask the question, is music in schools being assessed appropriately, or are schools still engaging with rock and popular music more broadly via a Eurocentric Western classical music lens, which looks at rock music and other forms of popular music tokenistically, really. So if you're interested, if you want to hear more about that, you needn't wait until you get a hold of the book. There is a 45-minute lecture which Simon has kindly put on the website, which is there now. So we've got 10 contributors present here today. So what I want to do now is just invite them one by one to speak about their chapter, and I'll then hand back to Simon so we can open up the discussion. So I'd like to kick off with Nicole Biomondi from McGill University. So Nicole, can I just hand over to you and I'll get rid of my visuals here.
Sure. Thanks so much, Paul, for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be part of this collection and also part of this panel today. My chapter is in the first section of the book on theory and analysis, and it deals with rhythm and meter in rock. I start out by surveying some theories of rhythm and meter that actually were developed for Western art music by Laerdal and Jakanoff, Christopher Hastie, Justin London, Harold Krebs, and Jason Yust. And I then look at adaptations of these theories for popular music by some other scholars, including Davy Temperley, Daphne Leong, Robin Addis, Matt Butterfield, and Keith Waters. And then I move on to look at some more recent theories of rhythm and meter that were developed specifically to apply to pop rock music by Mark Butler, Rick Cohn, Scott Murphy, Brad Osborne, and myself. And then I kind of compare and contrast all of these and their explanatory power. Then I move on to look at some common rhythmic patterns in pop rock and explore the differing cognitive and aesthetic principles that might underlie them. It turns out that many of these common patterns, especially ones based on triple groupings in a duple context, seem to be overdetermined. And the focus here is theory, but there's also several demonstrative analyses. Then in the last section of the chapter, I look at several broader issues, including the relationship between rhythm and meter in music with an explicit beat layer, the apparent binary default that has been discussed by David Huron and is pretty much demonstrated by the overwhelming prevalence of rock music that's in 4/4. the nature of the backbeat pattern and its function, and the relationship of popular music to dance. Yeah, so that's my quick survey, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nicole. That's great. I'll quickly bring my image back in. Thank you. So next, Andrew Blake from the University of Arts in London. Andrew, you okay? Is Andrew still in the building?
Am I still here? I think
Yeah.
I am. Yes. Can you see here? So here we go. First of all, then, many thanks to Alan for the invitation, and Paul for the very, very careful editing that's gone on. So pause and rewind. When Alan's invitation arrived, I was really taken aback by what I was being asked to do, and I panicked for a little bit. But I think we've done something that adds from slightly left field in a way to the book, because I was asked to talk about music in time-limited events, which turned out to be not easy things to deal with, like rock videos, but sporting occasions, even the experience of shopping. So I decided to start by looking at a sort of paradisal moment when it seemed that punk and football fandom were part of a resistant youth culture, looking at early cultural studies, and then quickly moving on from that to later research using thinking in cultural studies, sort of post the arrival of the French cultural theory. So the late Steve Redhead, for example, used Baudrillard and Virilio to identify the mediatization of sports and music events, making them into a part of a hyperreal economy. And the move towards this kind of individual-centered, psychologized rather than sociologized society, involving the appearance, at least, of a great deal of choice and enjoyment. An example is NBA fans who are smartphone users can dial up their favorite walk-up tunes for their stars to enter the arena at the beginning of a match, or used to be able to. To model that further, I looked at work on the psychosocial effects of music in personal sports training. There's a lot of very interesting recent research in that. Again, I had to go slightly out of my comfort zone by looking at sort of biological as well as cultural research. Very, very interesting. But I compared to that, which, to put it very simply, involves thinking about music as a motivator, to music in the shopping mall, where lots of researchers have helped companies to provide music which will apparently maximize purchases by using music as a motivator, as something which makes people move more swiftly, more slowly, purchase more, and so on and so on. And the conclusion of all this, drawing on the work of Lawrence Stern in particular, who says, in mass-mediated societies, the outside social world of recorded songs, mass-mediated images, and programmed spaces and schedules is folded into that which is most inside and private, the substance of effect and experience. Quite so. So that way in which rock, amongst other things, has been drawn into the hyperreal of the experience economy and its effects on us are something I think we all need to look into. So that was my little contribution.
Thanks so much, Andrew. That's great. Thank you. And next we've got Nick Bray. I think Nick deserves a particular shout out because he's in New Zealand, Waikato Institute of Technology in Hamilton. So a special welcome to you, Nick.
Thank you very much for having me here. So my chapter was concerned with the terminology that has been used to categorize rock music. And I begin from the observation that the commonplace terms of style and genre refer to collections of songs bound by shared patterns, although there is much variation in how authors treat these concepts in specific terms. So what details comprise style and genre as separate categories, if indeed they are conceived as such, the scope of each term, and above all, the relationship between them. So I sketch out several possibilities for conceptualizing the style-genre relationship and what the analytical and discursive implications are for each. And further to that, I outline several other terms that have been utilized as subsidiaries to style on the basis of how widely the patterns are replicated. So looking at idiolect, intra-opus style, and my own sonic patterns and compositional strategies. Ultimately, what I argue is that what we call such categories is much less important relative to being able to articulate what types of connections between and within songs such categories illuminate. And I conclude with several suggestions for further areas of inquiry. Understanding style conception from musicians' perspectives, which may be wishful thinking, as well as developing models for understanding changes in rock styles. There have been some sort of early forays drawing on the work of Leonard Meyer from a classical context. And then finally investigating a little further the temporal qualifiers that we often attach to categories, whether post, early, late, and whether these reflect aesthetic qualities alongside chronological details. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nick. That's great, thank you. Okay, next we've got Brad Osborne from the University of Kansas.
Thank you, and hello from my home studio here in Kansas. Taylor Myers and I wrote about something quite essential to the entire collection, that being scholarly efforts to define the rock genre itself. We separated our literature review into 3 scholarly eras, if you will. We begin in the early 80s, surveying contributions stemming from communication studies, media studies, and cultural studies, most of which use semiotic methods to assess what counts as rock. They're especially concerned with rock versus pop, as if these were 2 diametrically opposed genres. In part 2, we turn our attention to a sort of watershed moment beginning in 1997 with a series of 4 edited collections appearing in just 5 years, including the first 2 from North American music theory. These 2 music theoretical collections include Kovach and Boone's Understanding Rock and Walt Everett's Expression in Pop Rock Music. We compare and contrast these essays with those found in the Cambridge Companion to Pop and Rock and in the collection simply titled Popular Music Studies. Part 3 is admittedly kind of a grab bag of approaches we've found since 2003 that confront the definitions of various genres head on. Finally, we conclude by admiring how we have, perhaps unknowingly, pigeonholed these authors into various genres ourselves, informed by our own positions as North American music theorists, how we see ourselves as different from musicologists, and how we understand both of these disciplines to be different from the so-called non-music disciplines, including scholars employed in communication studies, media studies, and cultural studies.
Thanks so much, Brad. Thanks, Brad. Okay, next we've got Sarah, who lives just a few miles down the road from me. Over to you, Sarah Hill.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. It's good to see everybody here. The chapter that I wrote is a survey of writing about rock in the critical literature and at the beginning, the early years of popular music studies as a field. So I look at the ways in which historiography and analysis kind of crept in to the scholarly discourse, and where that came from, and then the tensions between scholarly writing and critical writing. So in order to do that, I surveyed quite a lot of the early literature from the years kind of 67 to 73, some of the collections that were written by early rock critics, the ways in which rock was defined as distinct from rock and roll, as distinct from popular music, and the ways that some of the sociologically oriented or musicologically oriented scholars came up through the sort of the critical writing about rock and defined the field in the early 70s and the 80s. So I survey a little bit about what were the kinds of arguments that were being developed and explored in the early years of Popular Music in Society, which was the first scholarly journal on popular music. And then that was in 1971, and then the formation in 1981 of both IASPM and the journal Popular Music, and the ways in which the tensions continue to be played out in both historiographic and analytical approaches to popular music. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, next we've got Catherine Meisel from Bowling Green State University. You there, Catherine?
I'm here. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, I'm being that person.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey.
Can you see me? I hope so. Okay, good. Thank you so much to, thank you so much to Alan and to Paul for the opportunity to be part of this exciting project. I can't wait to read everyone else's chapters. I was just looking up the price of the book before I started, but yeah, it all sounds really, really exciting. So my chapter is about voice in rock, and I start with an overview of some of the significant meanings that rock voices have been described and how they've been studied across disciplines. Then, okay, is someone talking to me? I'm sorry. No? All right. So across disciplines. Then I discuss how vocalities, which I am defining today for time's sake as vocal ways of being, have defined, transgressed and erased genre boundaries, and how practices of singing reflect and shape ideas about identity and authenticity in rock. And then I also talk about the sonic and ideological roots of rock vocalities in the intertwined contexts of race and disability and gender.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks a lot. That's great. Thank you. Sorry that I think some kids were running around in the background there. not in my place, I should say. Okay, so next on to Mark Duffy from University of Chester. How are you doing, Mark?
Hi. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Simon, Paul, and Alan for today. So my chapter is on fans and consumption, and I look at different ideas from popular music studies and fan studies and associated ideas to think about the idea of the rock audience and how it's being perceived. So I look at 4 different theoretical perspectives, which can be associated in different ways. The first suggests that our understanding of the audience is a consequence of rock's extended reaction against elitism and criticism. So that's kind of mass culture related. The second says that rock has created a kind of community, or at least a kind of communality. So that's thinking about that idea. The third suggests that mainstream media representations have a hidden significant fan productivity. So there I'm thinking of what the fans do with the material they get and what the fans make and their practices. So things like record collecting, bootlegging, fanzines and the rest. And then a final perspective suggests that the rock audience is actually a composite housing a variety of discrete experiences based on the social identities of individual participants. So in other words, for example, male and female fans might have distinct experiences, and the same goes for participants of different generations, national identities, music tastes, subgenres, interests, and so on. So the chapter argues that a critically nuanced approach is required, and that in every instance we really need to ask by who and for what purpose the rock audience is being defined. That's what I'm doing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's great. Next, we've got 3 to go. So the next, Jeremy Wallach from Bowling Green State University. Over to you, Jeremy.
All right. Well, thank you very much to Alan and Paul for doing this book, and thank you to Simon for organizing this session. My chapter is called Rock as Post-Colonial Soundtrack, and I really am grateful for the opportunity to write this. It brought together a lot of things that really no one that I found has brought together. And it made me realize that if you look at rock music from the perspective of the non-Western world or the non-English speaking world or the formerly colonized world, you get very different answers to some of the familiar questions that rock music scholars tend to ask themselves and then dismiss as you know, having pretty pat answers, but not really being worth asking in the first place. So one of the sort of bits of conventional wisdom that people tend to carry around with them is that rock music outside of the Anglo-American mainstream is derivative, doesn't really have much value, and is inauthentic and commercial. And I'd like to think that you can quickly dispense with that kind of prejudice if you do any research outside of America and England and the sort of Anglophone sphere. That's fairly easy to dismiss, but it's a fairly ingrained prejudice. But there's more. So I address that sort of cultural imperialism thesis, but in the process of looking at the mostly ethnographic and historical literature on places like Argentina, Iran, Russia, China, Indonesia, I also address another common sort of consensus point, that rock, famously defined by Simon Frith as a musical style that's always at war with its own mode of production, has been fundamentally unable to transcend that mode of production, and because it is compromised by commodity capitalism, is therefore a failure, unable to actually trigger profound social and structural change. Well, that actually is not sustainable if you look at rock's social impact outside of the Anglo-American mainstream, outside of the Western world. If you look at places like Tunisia, Indonesia, the former Soviet bloc, you find that actually rock has been politically rather impactful. So even that sort of consensus point falls apart. And then lastly, the sort of general agreement that rock has run its course, that rock is even dead. Now, the idea that rock is dead is kind of a sort of adolescent, rebellious kind of pose. It's obviously not dead. It makes as much sense to say that jazz is dead or classical music is dead. Obviously, it's not dead, but people have said its best years are behind it. And that also doesn't make a lot of sense, because in a lot of countries, particularly developing countries, rock music is on its way up. And the chapter looks particularly at rock subgenres, which has already been discussed, are sometimes included under the umbrella of rock and sometimes not. Talking about things like punk and indie and metal. These genres seem to be increasing in popularity in some parts of the world. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that metal actually is extremely popular right now, tends to be a sort of gateway genre. It tends to be what's popular first in a lot of places where there is no rock music. And other styles of rock music tend to follow after the popularity of metal. Metal tends to be popular first. So that suggests that rock music may be just getting started. And the fact that it hasn't evolved much since the 80s, maybe because it doesn't have to. Maybe like the novel, it can be, or comic book superheroes, it already reached the apex of its development and now is just exported kind of the way it has been for a long time. Anyway, so that's in a nutshell what my chapter is about.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Yeah, next we've got Laurie Burns from University of Ottawa. Over to you, Laurie.
Hi, thank you. I have to say in advance, my internet keeps going in and out, so I hope that I last. Am I being heard?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've just had a bit of a freeze there.
now?
Yeah, it's certainly frozen this side. I don't know about anybody else.
Yeah, it's frozen.
Yeah.
Take some of the bandwidth down. Voice rather than image.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear now, Laurie. I just heard okay there.
But my thanks are okay, good. Thanks are very sincere. I won't repeat my thanks. So the chapter is entitled Understanding Gender. Was to offer a critical reflection on the state of gender and methods. I organized the discussion around subjectivity, agency, narrative, performativity. And I put those tools to work in the analysis of a song by Floor Jansen's band Revamp, the metal singer I spoke about at my keynote on Tuesday. My analytic goal was to examine how her song performance can be understood to make meaning in the cultural sphere, and specifically in of gender and sexuality. I demonstrated how the song challenges the concept of agency in the lyrics. I considered intersecting axes of song lyrics and the music. I closed with a consideration of her performativity as it developed genre codes that emerge from the song. I hope that was heard. Perhaps you could confirm.
Thanks, Laurie. 80% of it?
Yeah.
There was a few, but I think there was enough there to get the gist of the chapter. I can see the bandwidth is struggling a little bit there.
It's struggling. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Laurie. Thank you.
Thanks.
And last but not least, I'd like to hand over to Stan Hawkins from the University of Oslo.
Thanks very much, Paul. It's really great being here at such an auspicious event. And I'd really like to thank Alan and yourself for the tremendous work you've invested in this pretty colossal project. And all of us who have edited anthologies acutely know well what this entails, with all the trials and tribulations one experiences on the way. So well done. My chapter is called Personas in Rock, and I used a subtitle under that mainly because there was a very famous film being shown at that time. So my subtitle was We Will Rock You. Writing this chapter gave me the opportunity to actually crystallize many thoughts on how we analyze and identify personas in rock music, and not least how we teach this to students of popular music. Moreover, I was able to build on the critical literature of scholars who have really furnished the central debates for some years now on the persona. I'm thinking of Laurie Burns, Simon Frith, Alan Moore, Eric Clark, Phil Auslander, Nicky Dibben, Keith Negus, and the list really goes on. In particular, I built my theory on the idea of proxemics as advocated by Alan, and came up with a model of 5 properties that deal with the communicative displays in the visual, as integrated in the realm actually of all the main senses: touching, hearing, smelling, and tasting. Analytically, this chapter gave me an opportunity to revel in legendary musical performances by the likes of Mick Jagger, Freddie Mercury, Tina Turner, Janis Joplin, David Bowie, and Stephen Morrissey, and the one and only Patti Smith. My methodology was primarily intertextual, with me addressing ideas of temperament as it relates to the behavioral features that shape the personality. And I kind of threw the gauntlet down for further musicological research into the impact of record production on the shaping of temperaments and personas. And the question I landed on was, if personas in rock are about role-playing, how do we know, or moreover, how do they know we know?
That's great, Stan. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dan. Great. Well, I think at this point we hand back to Simon, who's going to take it on from here. So can we do that, Simon? Is that okay?
You can indeed. Yeah. I don't know how I'm going to take it on. But, just actually on a very kind of pragmatic note, Laurie, if you'd like to, if you want to record just your 1 minute video, I could just edit that into this video afterwards, just so that you're not beset by glitches. You could just send that through.
Sure, thanks. That's great.
Okay. How do you deal with that variety of things and come up with a question? Okay, I suppose I'm going to kick things off and then invite people in. But maybe my first question to both of you, I guess it starts with Alan, because this is your sort of the initial kickstart of this, is having looked at the number of guitars hanging on walls behind people in these video things. There's quite a few practitioners in the room as such, and yet very little about research into rock performance as a kind of conservatoire, poesis kind of approach. I just wondered, was there a decision not to include that kind of thing?
There is a chapter on that. It's only one. I suppose it was a case of balance. One of the problems I find in researching performance is that you always have to do it via another medium. So you always have to do it via video or via recording, because you do not have the performance there to address. So in some senses it's subsumed by other things, which is why I think we've got one chapter specifically relating to performance studies, but no more. I mean, I actually had a list of 52 chapters I wanted to start off with, and I had to cut down the ones that I thought, am I going to find somebody? Do I know somebody who's written well and who I think I can cover that? And that was one of the reasons why certain things got left. So so certain things are not covered in as much detail, either because they're not actually researched so much, or because I couldn't find the people. So there we go.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm going to stop hogging the discussion. I'm quite happy for people to put things into the chat if they want to, if they don't want to speak up. But I can also, you can also put things into the chat that say, can I ask a question? Or you can just say stuff at the moment, because, well, has anyone got any questions straight off the bat? No. Okay. It is quite a kind of intimidating medium as far as that's concerned. This has been oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting question.
Good one.
Any tips for someone embarking on a first large edited collection? I've just done one of these blues recollections as well, and I have no tips at all. But maybe maybe you two want to come in.
Do you want to kick off, Alan? Do you want to?
Oh, yeah. I suppose. I suppose a key thing, I think, is to have a clear conception of what you're trying to do and recognize what the boundaries are. In other words, what you're going to try and produce is not going to be the finished object. You're not actually going to achieve it. So you've got to decide what is, what are the limits you're going to accept. Certain things can be varied, but certain things can't. And I think it's necessary to have that as part of the conception. I suppose one of the other big questions is how do you find your authors? And I broached this early on because it's a common thing these days to put out a call for papers for this sort of thing. And if you're going to do that, then I think you need to be very clear what it is you're going to allow people to. You've got to be prepared to say, no, I'm sorry, that's not going to fit my conception. Which is, I don't like saying no, which is why I didn't take that angle. What else? Yeah, think right at the start, think about your indexing, because the most expensive thing you're going to encounter as an editor of this is the index. You either do it yourself, which is probably going to take you 5 or 6 weeks. It's great fun. I love doing indexes. I don't say that they're any good, but I do love doing them if I've got the brain power. But if not, then the publisher is almost going to insist that you hire a professional indexer, and that is expensive. So that's something to build into your plans right from the outset. Yeah, those are the things that immediately come to mind. Paul, I don't know whether you've got anything else to add.
Yeah, I think you've probably covered everything. I think probably the last bit of advice I would add to that is don't take another one on after you've just completed one, which is actually what I've just done. I'm doing another one at the moment, a much smaller volume, and yeah, I realize that you sort of need a bit of a break. But I think Alan's advice right at the start there is about being prepared that the volume isn't necessarily going to match your original vision. Sorry, it's inevitable that will happen. And yeah, you also need tact and diplomacy, I think, as you're sort of going through the process of these things. Yeah, I actually had black hair before I started this this handbook, so yeah. Just joking.
Great. Alex, do you want to jump in with your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, my question, I guess, is you've spoken really interestingly about compiling, putting together the collection. I was just wondering about the way, you were speaking about the diversity of contributors. I was just wondering if that stretched to people from the Global South or from BME backgrounds as well. And of course, owing to like the sort of heritage and influences upon rock and roll and the way in which it's codified and canonized. I thought that'd be quite interesting as well. Yeah, no, it's a very important question. I mean, I did have various people, including, well, pretty well every. I mean, I hate categories, but one can't do without them. I had a range of people who I wanted to include and couldn't, basically because people said no, thank you, I've worked with you before. So there aren't enough people from particularly BME background. In fact, I'm not sure how many we have, but it wasn't for want of trying. I mean, it's a problem.
You can only go with people who can find time in their writing schedules at the time you need them, and who can actually address the question you want them to address. So that you know, if you're strong on that, then it does limit the people who are going to write for you. But it's a very important point.
Okay, thank you.
And Stan, did you want to come in?
Well, this was just a very quick response to something Alan said right at the start of his talk today. Yeah, I do agree with you in one sense that there seems to be an overabundance of texts pouring out the whole time. But in a sense, this is more or less our doing as well. You know, we did start courses on popular music in the early 90s, and I really can't believe how much literature my students actually want to absorb and get their sort of teeth into. And in a sense, because of the nature of the field, we do have to update these anthologies, I feel, the whole time. So, for example, to take you as an example, you know, 1993, Rock the Primary Text suddenly had another rebirth, and then there was another book that came, and students are really keen to see where you are situated today, and you know, how maybe your perspectives have changed and whether you've included things that you didn't do earlier on. So my experience with undergrads, postgrads, and I have quite a few PhDs in popular music at the moment, is that really I have a feeling they can't get enough literature in popular music. They are really at the cutting edge of, you know, wanting to read up on these things. So I don't think we should worry too much about the fact that this is just one in a very long line of
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
turned out. Yeah, for what that's worth.
Great. Okay. Brad, you've got is that a related question, the access one? Yeah.
Hi. I have a question, I guess it's a two-part question about access to this volume, but also a broader question about access to volumes like this moving forward. So as we all know, finding a chapter in an edited collection can be quite a difficult task, especially if you don't have access to a university library or the $147.50 to buy the volume. So I'm wondering to the editors of this volume, what sort of plans there are to have maybe open access or electronic access to the book. And then the bigger question is, what does it say to make an edited collection in this day and age when so much scholarship is moving toward open access, et cetera?
It's an interesting question. As far as I know, it is available or will be available as an ebook, but the ebook is really expensive. You know, off the top of my head, it's certainly over £100. So it is really expensive, and it's an issue. You know, I had a similar issue with the Frank Zappa edited collection I did a few years ago, where there were people in the Zappa community who wanted to purchase the book, but it was £75, and I think it is an issue. I don't know, Alan might know a bit more than me, or even Simon might, in terms of what Bloomsbury's intentions are in terms of open access, but I don't know. I'm not aware of any. It is available as an ebook, but it's an expensive ebook, which mainly libraries will buy.
I think that's the point. As far as the publishers of these types of collections are concerned, their market is libraries, university libraries. And because they're whatever, or I shouldn't say this, should I? We haven't got a publisher in the room, have we? For all the ways that we word our proposals and such like to ensure that actually anybody can pick this book up and get something out of it, in most cases that's not really true. It's an academic audience and its libraries who are going to buy it. And so you're assuming that, or I guess we're all assuming that if you want to read it, you'll have access to a library, and that's how you'll do it. I'm not altogether happy with that. I mean, it's very hard to fight against that. But I must admit, what I've taken to doing is actually to putting drafts of things that I've written on ResearchGate. Where, I mean, you can't really do it before the thing is out. But, you know, I mean, in the humanities, we don't move that fast, do we? I mean, even stuff that's 10 years old is still worth reading. So that's my sort of rather cack-handed solution. But I mean, you raise an important issue. I mean, I suspect that the time for, or the time for publishers is nearly past. Having to go through publishers is I mean, the value that publishers have is that they ensure that everything is refereed. That seems to me to be the real role. And if you want to distinguish between things which have been refereed and things which haven't, then you need to erect something like that, and publishing, you know, publishers are the way that we do it. But I mean, that's a much larger question, and thankfully I don't think it bothers me very much anymore. But you know, your generation, you're going to have to deal with that.
I mean, what I would add to that, Alan, in the UK anyway, obviously it's tied in with the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which relies on publications being peer reviewed. You know, I know with journal articles, quite often, because they go through a rigorous peer review system, you know, they get that sort of 2-star badge, you know, almost automatically, because it's gone through a rigorous review. And obviously it's a game that we as academics have to play. I don't know what it's like in the States, but certainly in the UK, it's really important that we're published with reputable publishers. So it's a little bit of a game, you know, but it does exclude particular people who may want to read these texts who haven't got access to university libraries. But I don't know what it's like in the States. It might be slightly different.
I'll just reply briefly with a comment on how it is in the States. You know, we have a system of tenure here. And for people seeking tenure, I was just granted tenure a year ago. And so for someone seeking tenure, being published in one of these collections is a big deal. It counts for a lot on the CV. I'm happy to share with all of you now, though, that having achieved tenure already, I'm less likely to now publish in sources like these that I know will be prohibited for people to access. I'd be more interested in publishing things which are still peer-reviewed but open access, such as the journal Music Theory Online, Current Musicology, other open access journals, but as well as edited collections that are purely online, such as the Engaging Students Collection, which is now in its 7th edition, I believe. So that's my perspective from North Americans who are confronting tenure.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Yeah, I think we're in for a kind of flurry of change quite soon. I think I mean, you know, things like this conference and you know, Rupert putting all the videos of the 2018 IASPM conference on YouTube, and now this is going to be an archive of this. I mean, all right, these are, you know, mostly 20-minute presentations and then the keynotes as well, but this is going to start you know, changing people's perceptions of what constitutes the kind of access route. We have this as far as the people who are looking to get published. There's a whole different set of criteria than the people who are looking for the information, and and those two things don't balance up at the moment, and I'm sure there are mechanisms by which we can make, and those the things that you've just mentioned, Brad, are exactly those kinds of things, but there needs to be something that's maybe a little bit larger scale or something. I'm not sure quite what that would look like. I know Dan Leach Wilkinson's started writing an online book, and that's turned into a kind of semi ongoing project that's sort of like a kind of blog that never stops, but is also chapter based. Sorry, I didn't mean to start jumping in again. Stan, sorry, Andrew Blake wanted to jump in first. Can I just let Andrew in? And then Laurie also wanted to say something. Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So a passing one on publishers, and then a big question on publishers, I suppose. The Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK recently removed VAT from ebooks, and I haven't noticed prices going down yet. If anybody has, could they let me know? It was nice of Bloomsbury, I thought, to give us some little samples of the chapters to read, but also incredibly frustrating. I'd really like to know what Laurie Burns does with Flora Jansen, who I admire very much, and how she fits Flora into her sort of topic. But even more, I'd like to know whether Alan and Paul think that rock is dead, because their chapter says they might come to a conclusion. I'm really keen to know, do they think it's a museum piece now, or something which is living but inhabitable but sort of finished as a structure, as I think Jeremy was suggesting, a bit like the novel? Is there an answer?
I don't think there's an answer. I think, like Jeremy said before, it's emerging in other parts of the world. I was at a heavy metal conference in Finland last year, where you know, it's a huge subject there. But also, you know, like yeah, we mentioned it in the introduction. You know, there's traces of rock music in music that isn't rock music. You know, and bizarrely enough, when we were finishing off the introduction to the collection, Sam Fender was #1, who, you know, is a Bruce Springsteen clone from Newcastle, like myself. But and I think the Beatles were #1 just the week before, or maybe the week after. So no, I think it's probably you could probably argue it through either way, but you know, no, not by my definition, it isn't. No.
And I think it depends on the perspective you want to take. I mean, that sort of question, it seems to me, is normally assumes that what you're talking about is new music being produced. So are there interesting new bands, or are there interesting established bands who are doing new things? It's predicated on this assumption that things are only alive if they're new, and yet we don't ask whether Mozart's music is dead. I mean, I use that example because he is for me. I can't stand it, but for a large audience, and this is the key point, for a large audience, that music is alive, is very relevant to them, has its role in structuring their internal life and all those sorts of things. So I think that it's still alive if it is alive for an audience, however that audience is defined. It doesn't matter to me whether it is developing or, you know, changing stylistically in a particular direction, or whether it's in a whirlpool going ever further down. If it has a role in benefiting an audience, then it's alive.
Great. Laurie, you wanted to come in. Laurie? Oh.
So sounding like a school marm, I wanted to say that I really feel that the research value of this book is tremendous, and grateful that the bibliography was to do a lot of peer review and editing. I see a trend towards a lack of deep research on a given topic. So people sometimes submit a paper to a journal without having really thoroughly prepared the research ground. So I think this volume will do a lot in that regard, just to illustrate to those researchers that it's important to make reference to the work that has come before, to respect the state of the field as it has been developed. And yeah, I'm probably sounding a little bit like a school marm here, but it's one of my pet peeves when I read something that's been submitted and it's clear that the research has not been thoroughly conducted. So thank you for including the bibliography, and thank you for building a kind of heavy companion for research here.
Yes, I would agree with that. As someone who was slammed with manuscript reviews after my semester ended, and continually having that experience. And one thing that maybe I should just add to what I already said, there is a globalization of rock music research going on now, along with the globalization of rock music, which I think will contribute to the music's vitality in the 21st century. And questions of access are particularly relevant when you look at who is reading the articles on ResearchGate and the articles on Academia EDU. The people reading my stuff come from all over the world, and particularly my work on Indonesia. It's being read by Indonesians, it's being cited by Indonesians, it's being discussed on Indonesian blogs. And that's not even, that's not something I would have foreseen when I was writing some of these things, particularly the things I wrote in the 90s. And what's most valuable, of course, is good scholarship. And good scholarship has to come about through the systems we have in place now, through peer review and through publishers, I think. And that makes me sound school marmish, to endorse the old ways. But I think there's something to be said for that, even if that means making this, making the resulting scholarly output perhaps a little less accessible, because all those things cost money.
Can I just jump in, because I found a similar thing when I was not for this volume, but I was writing an article about Polish rock music under communism a while back, and it was very interesting to see how inaccurate a lot of the published materials were, and how they were kind of very they were ideologically motivated, but they weren't in a kind of polemic kind of way. There was just a kind of a background of ideas about what communism was like that underpinned it, and it was only really talking to Poles who lived under communism that the kind of erroneous nature of quite a lot of that scholarship, which was published and peer reviewed mostly in America, became clear. It was quite an eye opener to see that when a subject's new, because even when you're peer reviewing things, people aren't going to go into the same level of fact checking that you've been into, and so certain things are just taken on on spec, if you like, as being, you know, well, they've said it, so it must be true. They wouldn't have said that if they hadn't checked it. So anyway, yeah. So there's a similar point, I guess. I know Stan wanted to come in again. Are you still there, Stan?
Yes, Simon. Just a very quick response to some of the things Andrew was saying a moment ago, and this access to publications. If it's of any consolation, the last Bloomsbury handbook, which Laurie Burns and I edited on music video analysis, came into my library in its full form in electronic form, which meant that students coming into my office actually had the entire book with all the page references all intact. And throughout Norway, there's been an enormous initiative to fight for this open access regulation that doesn't only apply to universities, but all general libraries. And I really hope this is the way we're going.
Great. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at the comments. There's so Brad, did you want to make a point there, or is that just a general comment? Right. Anyone else got any further questions? I think for me, having done one of these Bloomsbury handbooks as well, the music production one, which we're going to launch later in the conference, although it's already out. I find this idea of trying to create something that is going to sort of stand as a milestone, especially when they're so incredibly expensive and are likely to sort of become outdated, I mean, what Alan was saying about the fact that we don't move very fast is obviously true. And so these kinds of materials are really powerful in one way, but I also wonder if this is the right kind of format for publishing as we go forward. Whether, well, I mean, the problem with it is that what should happen is that academics should take ownership of it rather than it being a commercial activity. But of course, none of us have got the time to do that, and you know, it's bad enough being asked to peer review, but to also you know, to manage the thing as well is a difficult, well, I don't know how it'll work. I mean, the mechanisms have become a lot easier as far as, you know, running this conference and running various other things that I'm working on at the moment. This is so much easier than it was even just 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm. Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Alan? You were.
No, I was just sort of agreeing. I mean, in terms of journals, that's the way they used to be run 60, 70 years ago. I mean, they didn't necessarily have publishers. You know, it's a fairly recent thing, publishers getting involved in journals. So there was no commercial side to them. The only thing that worries me about some open access, and I'm afraid it's not something that bothers me too much, so my information is a little bit sketchy. But there are some open access venues, I suppose one can call them, platforms, where the only reason they can work is because the author pays rather than the reader paying. The author pays. Now that's fine if you've in your in an institution which has the funding to do that. But that's going to become very, very tight. I can see the time fairly soon where if you want to publish in one of those sorts of platforms, you're going to have to fund it yourself individually. Now, if that's the alternative to making the reader pay, I don't know where we go with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that Alan. I mean, effectively, the author already does pay for example, the indexing. If you don't do it yourself, if your institution doesn't pay for it, then it comes off any royalties you make from the book. So you certainly don't do these collections for money, remuneration. It's it's one of those things that you do it because you love the subject. End of, really. There's no other reason to do it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Nicole, did you want to come in?
I did, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that not all open access venues require the author to pay, right? So there's a bunch of journals that are institutionally sponsored, like ZGMTH, right? The German Society's journal, and Music Theory Online, Empirical Musicology Review. There's a more regional one called Gamut. And so I think that to me is probably the ideal venue for popular music analysis, just because if it's an open access online format, in a sense, you can be a lot braver with issues of copyright. I've had a lot of very frustrating experiences with other publishers saying, oh, write us a chapter on rhythm, but you can only use musical examples of 2 bars long. Which is, you can't, look, I got to have at least 4 bars, right? If I'm going to make any kind of a point. But so when I was editing Music Theory Online, that was a lot easier, just because we assumed if anyone sent a takedown request, it would be very simple to change it, but we never did. I think because no one makes any money directly off that venue. So I guess I'm ideologically aligned here with Brad, in that I think I'm thrilled to have this volume, and like everyone else, I'd just like to thank you so much for everything that you put in doing this and making this resource available. And yet I think looking forward, probably that's the direction things are going to go. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm just again reading comments. Justin, Stan, or Nick, did you want to make a bigger point, or were these comments for the chat? Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing about remuneration is crazy, but I have been introduced. I don't know how many people have come across the ALCS, which has provided me with, well, not very much, but a few £100 for royalties on it's library use, isn't it, mainly that you get from that. Yeah, I think sorry, again, I'm talking and reading at the same time, which is a very bad combination.
Sorry, Simon. No, I'm just looking through the comments as well. But one thing I was going to say, talking about the question that came through about advice that Alan initially responded to, but just to say, I'll not mention what chapter it was, but one of the chapters in the book wanted to quote some lyrics by the Beatles, a very small number of lyrics. It was 2 lines, I think. And the amount was absolutely astronomical, which of course the guy who wrote the chapter would have had to have paid himself. It's the publishers don't pay for this. If lyric And what I found, and the experience that I've had with this, is that it varies massively depending on the publishers, who own the songwriting credits. They can charge crazy amounts, and the Beatles seem to be particularly expensive. It's just an observation more than anything else.
So, lots of people complaining about how much they've had to pay for in order to reproduce things in the comments. And I think that is a shocking aspect of this.
There are usually ways around that. There are usually ways. I mean, with lyrics, you can point the reader to a fairly stable lyric site, of which there are quite a few. I must admit that's what I do. Instead, particularly if you want to quote a melody line or something, the best way of doing that is to simply remove the stave and call it a contour analysis. And then all the reader has to do is draw in the stave. Works. So there are ways around those issues sometimes, if you think laterally.
Yeah, no, that's a really nice way of putting it. Can I just pull us back a little bit from the kind of more general discussion about the publishing industry and back to the volume a little bit with maybe what'll be getting close to the last question, because we are 90 minutes in now, which is that I mean, this for me, just hearing I haven't seen a copy of the book yet, so but having from what I know about it, and also hearing these 1 minute explanations, it's a really exciting project in a lot of ways. It goes so broadly, and I wonder, to come back, I suppose this relates to my first question as well, but to come back to that thing that you said right at the beginning of the kind of balance between musicology and sociology, and I wonder how much you think it's true that that's still quite substantially separate in people's approaches now, because it strikes me that we're seeing a lot more of textual analysis that is contextual as well, and vice versa, that of contextual analysis that points to the meat a little bit more. Do you see that as a trend, or is that just me?
I think it's there, but I think it's sometimes a bit questionable. I think there's a real issue here with the whole notion of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity and all these other various types of avoiding what you're trying to talk about, which is that when a musicologist tries to talk about context, normally that context is comparatively weak. You can tell where the disciplinary basis is, where they're strong and where they're not so strong. Equally, when somebody from cultural studies tries to talk about musical detail, you and I will pull them apart because there's a weakness there. And I don't think it's possible, unless you're a very rare sort of person, to have the right degree of strength across more than one field, quite frankly. So, and this is why, although there are moves in that direction, you do find, I think, this sort of the stable mentality is still there. What we don't have, and this is, I remember asking this in the Glasgow International IASPM 1996 or something it was. And I said, look, I want to work with a sociologist to provide a rounded picture of something, anything. Can we talk? And I couldn't find, I mean, okay, that was a long time ago, but I couldn't find anybody who would actually come on board with that and work collaboratively with somebody from another discipline so that you provided a much more rounded picture of what was going on. And I don't think it's happening even now. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Well, for the performance in the studio project that I did back in 2012, that was one of the few times where I did feel that as a group there were a dozen of us from you know, with Tom Porcello and Alan Williams and Anna Danielson and a lot of people from I don't think we had any. Well, no, Morten Mikkelsen was very much on the sort of sociology side of things. So we had a really interesting conversation, but I couldn't get them to publish afterwards because nobody, you know, it wasn't in anyone's interest.
Yeah, exactly.
To publish you know, to put that much effort into a book that wasn't going to be valued within their own discipline.
Yeah, that is the problem. But if you look at what often happens in a science lab, if you're dealing with a leading question, then you actually have got people in there from a variety of different disciplines, which is why they publish with 35 authors. You know, which is the other extreme. But there's the funding there to do that because they're dealing with questions which funders want answered. The questions that we ask are not questions that funders want answered.
Definitely not. No.
That's the problem.
No, and Stan, sorry, Stan, is that a point about the about this idea of discipline, cross-discipline work?
Yeah, I was just thinking through the course of the last 30 years, trying to survive and function as musicologists, as Alan was pointing out, has actually prompted many musicologists to deal with the transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary challenges of working. And many of us have written pieces, if not books, like Laurie Burns and Mark Lefrance, that deal with these fusions between cultural studies, where actually half of the time you don't know whether it's the musicologist speaking or the sociologist or the cultural studies. So I don't want to just kind of wipe that out as if, you know, we haven't come, you know, quite a long way on this issue. I do understand the problems we've been wrestling with over all these decades, but I don't really accept that we haven't been able to break through some of these huge barriers.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing, unless somebody else has got a question that they wanted to bring in. Before maybe I ask you, the two of you, to sort of sum up a little bit, but maybe one last question is that the very first academic conference that I went to, I came quite late to being an academic. I was a sound engineer for a long time, and then around 2003-4 it was, I think. It was an ethnomusicology conference, and I was trying to write about groove and was kind of I realized how out of depth I was when I got there, I suppose. But what was really interesting is how so many people in that conference were talking about hierarchies of power and things, and that was entirely reflected in the anthropology of the conference itself. It was, you know, in some instances it was almost as if these sort of discussions about particular musical cultures were actually discussions about this this kind of, university structure and who, you know, the alpha males and all this kind of stuff was going on. That's a kind of flippant way into the question, which is that that again, going back to your point, Alan, the trying to be universal or at least fair and equitable about distributing the subject area is, as you said, driven by what's available and what is being written about. And I wonder if there's anything in particular that you think you wish you had in here that isn't in here, because I'm kind of looking at it thinking, wow, this is great, but I'm also wondering what it is that you would like to add if you could.
Yeah, we did lose one chapter quite late, unfortunately, which was about copyright and contracts. And I would very much like to have had that in there, because it's I think it's a slight gap in what's there. There are others, but that's the biggest.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, would you like to give us a little sort of closing statement of some kind, or because the concert is going to start in just over 5 minutes. We have 3 bands who have recorded live sets for us, and they're going to play straight afterwards. So, would you like to?
I just want to say thank you for turning up and hearing something about it, and I hope you learned something from it. That's the real function. Yeah, I hope you each individually can take something away from it if you eventually lay your hands on it in some way.
Cool.
Yeah, I would just add to that. Just thank you for everybody. Thanks to you, Simon, in particular, for organising this virtual event. It's been really great to be involved, and thanks to the contributors for participating in it, and most importantly for participating in the book, because without those guys there's no collection. So yeah, thanks very much.
Right, I'm gonna stop the recording there. So look, I'll start streaming the concerts at 1:45. They're kind of timed releases on YouTube, so they happen semi-automatically. But if there are 3, let me just get the details of the 3 artists that we're featuring today. It's Phil Braithwaite, who's a guitarist who has worked with Vanessa May amongst other people, and he's performing a 20-minute set of original music. And then Ben Donnelly, who I think is actually in the session, has performed a live set of saxophones, bassoon and voice, Bollywood music, and it's a very eclectic collection based around the letter B, like a Sesame Street style, he says. And then we've got a set by a 5-piece group called Green Tangerines, which is sort of 70s jazz fusion style. So we can have a short comfort break, but yeah, I'd like to thank everybody and just hope that you'll stick around for the concert as well, and enjoy some music, because after all, we're here to talk about music. We should be listening to it as well. Great. Okay, so I'm going to switch my camera off for the 2 or 3 minutes, and then start sharing my screen when I'm ready. But I'm going to go and grab myself a glass of wine to sit and watch this with. All right. Thanks, everybody. It's been a really great session.
Thank you.
Hey, hopefully this is going to work. Tried to do this last week, didn't work. So thanks for tuning in again. So yeah, I'm going to play a few songs for you. My name is Phil Braithwaite, and I'm going to start off with a tune that I wrote when I was 21 years old. So here we go. crowd goes mild. Brilliant. So yeah, it's my first track. I'm going to play a few more. So yeah, I guess I should explain a little bit about myself. I'm Phil Braithwaite. I'm a professional guitarist, composer, author. I've written a couple of books. And thank you for Regatta for asking me to come and do this for the conference. I'm going to play a couple more tunes. Oh, also there's a link. Donate if you want to give me some money. Don't if you don't want to. It's fine. Here we go. some more. Yeah, cool. Right, and you're going to play one more tune. Like I said before, if you want to donate, donate. If you don't, have a drink on me. Hope you enjoyed it, and maybe I'll see you again. Take care. There we go. That's me. That's done. Enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy the rest of the musicians. Hashtag stay safe.
Hi everybody. I'm not sure how many people are watching this via YouTube outside of the or the YouTube live stream of the Zoom session. Just to let you know that we've got the second of the three artists coming up in about 3 minutes. And that's Ben Donnelly, who's going to be playing various saxophones, his bassoon, and doing some Bollywood style singing as well. So I feel like a DJ at the moment, but well, there you go. That's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to be sharing the screen from the live feed from Ben Donnelly in a second or two.
Well, hello, and thank you for watching my little live show. And thank you very much to Simon for putting all of this on, and to Agta for inviting me to play. And this is going to be fun. Agta said I can play whatever I want. I can do a whole mix of things. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. In fact, I'm going to follow the model of Sesame Street and tell you that this recital is brought to you by the letter B. And I'm going to start with a jazz tune called Bye Bye Blackbird. Plenty of B's in that one. Pied by Blackbird, and for my next couple of Bs, or 3 in fact, I'm going to go to my bassoon, and once I've grabbed it, I'm going to play some Bach. And you'll know the title of this as well. It also begins with B, and you might have had it as your ringtone back in the early 2000s. Yeah, short and sweet and with nowhere to breathe. Okay. What have we got next? Oh, this is going to be fun. Yeah, how about a bit of John Coltrane? This is Blue Train. Okay, now that was Blue Train, and okay, next one is going to be a bit of a cheat because it's a famous aria for alto sax, but I'm going to go with the composer named Walzer and play on baritone sax to keep with my bees theme. So if you're a classical sax person, you've probably heard this piece loads of times, but just to be different, I would do it on bari. Okay, this is the Walzer aria. you all doing? We are nearly at the end, so this would be a very good time for me to say thank you for watching. If you joined halfway through, or if you came in right at the beginning and you stuck with me, that's even better. I hope you enjoying everything that's going on musically at the moment, and you're coping as well as you can with the pandemic, because I know it's driving a lot of people mad, including me. But I get a lot of time to do a lot more music, which is fantastic. Okay, I'm going to finish with a big barrage of B's now. What have we got? We've got Big Band, that's 2 already. It's a Bollywood song. Yeah, Bollywood song for big band. And the title is Bache Ki Jaan. So we've got plenty of B's here. I need to get some music because I want to do the alto solo exactly as is. But most of it I'm going to sing. I've still got a page on the floor. Okay, this is just proof that I'm doing all this live, no edits. Okay. I actually recorded a version of this. It's on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, which is Saxbend, S-A-X-B-E-N-D, which is also the name I use on pretty much everything else. So if you search that, S-A-X-B-E-N-D, Saxbend, on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and whatever else you can think of, if I'm there at all, that is how you will find me. Alright, I think I'm in danger of overrunning, so let's just get started. Well, thank you very much for watching, and enjoy whoever's on next. And I hope to catch you all over the internet. Come and find me if you're interested. Cheers, and have a great evening.
All right, I'm back again. Nassos, not sure if you're still here. You may have just left us on in the background. Also, don't know how many people are watching on YouTube Live, so I'm not going to say anything rude. But I am going to find the next act, so to speak, because okay, the green tangerines link is not on the website. Okay, let me just find where the green tangerines. I've got 4 minutes to do this in. Okay, let me sort this out. Okay, so my channel on YouTube, I'm going to talk you through. Oh, there we go. Right, share, embed link, copy link, close. I hope there are 100,000 people listening to this as we speak, but I suspect it's Agatha and Tom. Hi, Tom. And okay, here we go. So I am now cutting and pasting the HTML into the website. This is live coding and updating. So if you refresh your screens, you should see green tangerines live. Not quite starting yet. Premieres in 2 minutes. Yes, Agatha says yes. This is, I don't know what's going on. I'm just talking to Agatha and Tom and Tom's dad apparently. Hi, Tom's dad. And what else do I need to do? I need to share this. Okay, I need to turn
Let's do that again.
All right. Well, shush. Stop.
Hello,
Hey,
Simon.
how you doing?
Yeah, we're well. Tom, say hi.
Hey, Tom. You working away?
The cat.
Oh, hi, cat. Well,
He's enjoyed it.
Yeah. I'm at my mum's house, so I'm
All right.
down in Shoreham.
Oh, okay.
Nassos, I'm guessing you're not there. Anyway, I'm going to stop now. I'm going to stop both recording and YouTubing. Oh God, we're still live on YouTube. So we've had all that exciting DJ stuff as well. Okay, I shall delete all of that. Oh, you are there. Hi, Nessos. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's it. I shall. I'll see you soon. See ya. Bye.